So we finally created our first song within Studio One 4. How can we go about exporting that song or stems from that song? That's what we're gonna take a look at in this section here. And the first thing that we should be aware of is including any meta information or metadata for our song. So if I come up to song at the top here, I'll click and come to the song information. We then have a window that's going to display any metadata or meta information that will be included within our song. Now this information is going to show up in various media players, and it will include the artist name, the year, genre, an image for your song if you've selected one. Now this is pretty empty here for my song information, but we can just click anywhere within this window and we're taken to the meta information for our song. And you can see that we have a large amount of fields here that we can go ahead and put information in. To the right, we can click on the ellipsis button there and choose an image to represent our artist or the song. So just know that you have the ability to add that information within your song. I'll go ahead and cancel out and we're taken back to this area. The other thing to note is we have song notes. So we can input any notes that we'd like to include for our song. We have track notes, so we can select individual tracks and then put notes for those as well. Also keep in mind that if you plan on doing any mastering within the project page of Studio One, once you input that meta information into the area that we were just taking a look at, that will be pulled into the project page and filled in automatically. Those fields will be populated and you'll be all set. So you only need to do that once if you're planning on mastering within Studio One. So next we're going to take a look at the exporting, but really quickly I'm going to open up a marker track just to point out a couple of things here. So notice that we have a start marker there. And then if I scroll all the way to the right, we have an end marker. So these are the start and end markers for our song. Now, if you're wondering how those got there, these are automatically created. Where are they coming from? Well, if I come to the start page and choose to create a new song, here we have a song length. So whatever is listed here is going to determine where those start and end markers are placed. So that's what that is about. We'll come back to our song. And while I have the marker track open, I'm actually going to add a couple more. So I'll just position the song cursor at bar 13. I'll click the plus button. So we've added a number 2 marker. And then I'm going to place the cursor here. I'll add one more, and this will all make sense in a moment. Now, in order to export, we'll come to Song, and we can see that we have Export Mix Down here, and we can also use Control E or Command E on the Mac. I'll go ahead and click that, and we're presented with a mix down window here. Now we're just going to run through all of these settings from top to bottom. So first we have the location. That's pretty obvious. We can click on this button here to select a new location. This is going to be the file name for our mixdown, and we have a publishing option here. So right now it's set to do not publish. That's going to be the setting by default, but we can choose to send this to Presonus's Notion software. We can also upload to SoundCloud if we have linked a SoundCloud account with Studio One. Below that, we have the format for the file. We can have that be a WAV or any of these other options down below. We can choose the resolution and the sample rate. Now to the right, we have between loop. And if we just take a look up above, we can see the loop markers are set. I'll cancel out at the beginning and end of all of our song information here. So if we export as a loop, then this is what it's going to take into account, whatever you have your loop marker set to here. Let's come back up to Song, Export Mixdown. And now we can choose between start and end marker. And we took a look at those, and we know now where those markers are created and what we can do to set those, but we can always click and drag and set those wherever we'd like. But if you make that selection, then it's going to download or render the mix between the start here and that end marker all the way there. We'll come back to the export mixdown. We then have an option for between each marker. So if we select this option, then it's going to export audio file for between these two markers, then these two markers, and then marker number 3 and the end marker. So you're going to get several audio files that is determined between each of these markers. The next option we have is between selected markers. So we can choose the start and number 2, which would be there. We can click the drop down menu to choose any of these other options as well. We have the duration of the audio file. We then have an options menu down at the bottom, and the output is going to be main. I have only 2 outputs on my audio interface, so main is my only option. But if you have an audio interface that has more than 2 outs and you've created sub outs within your song, you can make those selections from here for those sub outs. We can choose to bypass our master effects, use real-time processing, and if you have any external processing that's going on or external instruments, then you will want to use this option so that Studio One is going to make use of those devices while it's rendering the file down. We have the right tempo to audio files. We can import that file to a track once it's been rendered down. Close after export will close this export window down. And then we have an overlap setting at the bottom that we can select and add an amount of time if we'd like to create any overlaps for the audio files that we are exporting. So once we have everything set as we'd like, we would then just click OK, and Studio One will begin the export process. And it's usually going to be, for my system at least, about 1.5 times the length of the actual song. We also have the option to export individual stems from with Studio One, so let's take a look at that. And before we do that, I'm going to mute one of these tracks, and this again will make sense in a moment. We can export stems by coming up to Song, and then just below the mixdown we can see we have stems here, and we can use Control-Shift and E or Command-Shift-E on the Mac. I'll go ahead and select that. Now we can see over in the right we have the same information that we saw, or the same options that we saw for exporting the entire mixdown, but what we do have now is our sources, and we can make individual selections for channels or tracks. Now the channels represents the channels that are included in the mix console. If we have tracks, these are going to be all of the tracks that are listed in the arrange view. Now I muted that track to show you that if you have any tracks that are muted, they will not be selected or available for exporting as a stem. We can see that it says muted there, and we can see that it's muted here. We have a few buttons at the bottom for selecting all, the active tracks, or none. I'll come back to the channels. And one of the main differences between these two is that our impact that we have loaded in this song, I have several of the pads routed to separate channels for the impact. So these are all channels for the impact. So we are exporting an individual track for the 808, for the roll snare, for the main snare, and so on. If we were on the tracks setting, then all of those are combined into one track. This is our impact. So all of those individual drum sounds will be exported as one stem, versus if we were to use the channels, then you'll have those as separate stems. So if I choose the select none, and then I'll just choose a couple of these, and then we'll click OK, and then we can see that our export has begun. And this is similar to what we saw for the complete mixdown of our entire song. Okay, and so that is how we can go about exporting our songs from Studio One as well as stems. And we're going to wrap up the course by taking a look at the project page.